Okay, ladies, this discussion of the Cold War during the 1950s will be pretty brief, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. So we're going to start in 1953 with Nikita Khrushchev becoming leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin's death, and he's definitely going to be, trying to think of the word, but he won't be quite as hardcore as Stalin is in many of his policies. You can see him here, he's got mayor of corn, so, representing the agricultural aspect of the Soviet economy, and of course, we know those two main aspects were industry and agriculture. And so, he ushers in a period that's somewhat more relaxed in relations with the Soviets. So the most relaxed period we've really had during the Cold War to this point. So the first main example of a Cold War kind of conflict within the Western Hemisphere is Guatemala. And Guatemala, of course, just south of Mexico in Central America, as you can see on the map there. And in 1954, a democratically elected communist government took over Guatemala, meaning that the people had chosen the particular leadership, which happened to be communist. But one of the first things they did was nationalize U.S. property and land, which means that they took it under the control of the government, and that was land and property that was owned by U.S. businesses. So that obviously got the attention of the United States. The CIA, our Central Intelligence Agency, trained some soldiers to overthrow the Guatemalan president in a coup. And this is kind of a pattern that we'll see throughout the Cold War, particularly in Latin America, is our CIA training soldiers in that particular country to overthrow a communist leader there. The new leader, Castillo, was a right-wing military dictator, still a dictator, still, very limiting on people's rights and freedoms, yet it wasn't a communist, so that was the leader that the United States supported. Civil war ensued, thousands were imprisoned, tortured, killed at the hands of Castillo's government. Yet again, the United States wanted to make sure that communism didn't spread. So again, this is the type of pattern that we see in Latin America, supporting non-communist governments, and sometimes those non-communist governments can be as brutal as a communist government, unfortunately. In 1955, we're going to see the Geneva Summit, which was a meeting of the world leaders in Geneva, Switzerland. And a summit is a word that you'll see again and again. The summit is the top of the mountain. The people who meet at a summit, not literally the top of the mountain, but a meeting, are the world leaders, the leaders of different countries throughout the world. You can see Eisenhower and Khrushchev shaking hands here at the Geneva Summit. And the idea of the summit is to improve relations, to talk things out, essentially, particularly between the Soviet Union and the United States. So you'll see several summits during the Cold War period. Now, the following year, we're going to see a couple Cold War conflicts on the world stage, one in Egypt and one in Hungary. Now, in 1956, the Egyptian leader, Nasser, asked for U.S. support to build the Aswan High Dam, a large dam on the Nile River. The United States refused because they knew the Soviet Union was going to be providing assistance as well. So the U.S. was out, the Soviet Union remained in, and would continue to provide assistance for the building of this dam. In response, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. So the Suez Canal, which had been under the control of Great Britain up until that time, became the property of Egypt, and that obviously was going to create some difficulties, especially for countries who had ships trying to get through the canal. Great Britain, France, and Israel, and remember, Israel was created in 1947, and obviously has had some conflicts with their Arab neighbors since then. Those three countries attacked Egypt, and the U.S. condemned the action, but really didn't take any military action here. In Hungary, in 1956, we see a rebellion. So we see people that are rebelling against the communist government there. The United States did not provide any assistance, nor did the United Nations, and the Soviets were able to roll in their troops and crush the rebellion. A lot of attention was diverted from Hungary because of the crisis in Egypt. So that's one reason the United States didn't actually get involved in the conflict. Anyway, it was also, a very brutal crushing of the revolution and of dissent in Hungary at the time. So we had talked about the Truman Doctrine and how the Truman Doctrine was basically the United States pledging assistance to countries to keep communist regimes from taking over there. Now, Eisenhower, when he's president in the 50s, will extend that basically to countries in the Middle East, and so that's what we refer to as the Eisenhower Doctrine. And we see this emerge in 1957. stating that the U.S. will aid particular countries in the Middle East. Lebanon and Jordan were the first where this was a danger, and they asked for help to restore order in those countries. The Camp David talks also took place in 1957. Eisenhower and Khrushchev met. They hoped their exchanges of views would contribute to a better understanding of the motives and position of each, and thus to the achievement of a just and lasting peace. So it was essentially another summit, another meeting, another diplomatic sitting down and discussing and trying to come to, agreements on each other's point of view, essentially. Camp David, of course, is the presidential retreat that was named for Eisenhower's son. It's outside Washington, D.C., so it's like a vacation getaway home, essentially, for the president. And we first saw it during Eisenhower's administration, and later other presidents will bring other world leaders there. Most famously in 1950s, we'll see Jimmy Carter broker peace between Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Begin of Israel in those Camp David talks. So it's a place where, sometimes it's a retreat, but sometimes a lot of diplomatic work gets done there. In any event, Eisenhower and Khrushchev met. They planned another summit in Paris for 1960s. That's where they're going to meet again in 1960s. So we could see that there was a pattern of pretty good relations at this point, and certainly hope that the future held even better relations between the two countries. Unfortunately, the relationship that had been improving between the Soviet Union and the United States got very frosty, chilly again because of the U-2 incident. You've probably heard of U-2 before. Yes, it is a very famous band. But before it was banned, it was the name of a plane that was used for reconnaissance or spying. It was designed to fly at a high altitude so that it could go undetected. This plane didn't. It was detected by the Soviets, and it was shot down over Soviet territory. Don't worry, the pilot, Gary Francis Powers, you see him pictured here. He parachuted to safety, well, relative safety, because he was taken prisoner by the Soviets, but he was released within a couple of years. Now, our president, Eisenhower, he admits spying, but he does refuse to apologize. Now, what had happened is that Paris summit that had been planned was going to go on. Both parties had arrived at the summit, but neither party had met together yet, and Khrushchev decided to leave because he wasn't getting that apology. So we're seeing that kind of the goodwill that had started to come about when Khrushchev became leader of the Soviet Union earlier in the 50s had pretty much ended because of this particular incident. All right, so that's some of the incidents during the 1950s that took place during the Cold War.